Johnny Carson ruled late night with a smile so steady it felt bulletproof. For 3 decades, nothing rattled him, until the nights that did. A tame animal that wasn't. A pop icon who treated his desk like a throne. A prank that nearly sent a sweet grandma to the floor. A best friend who stopped being a friend. These weren't bloopers. These were the moments when the king of cool felt heat, real heat, and the Tonight Show's perfect machine ground and sparked on live TV. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the 7 times Carson's control snapped. And careers, reputations, even lifelong bonds paid the price. You'll see claws hit steel, a studio turn into a disaster zone, a superstar push boundaries past the censors, and a betrayal so deep it froze a legend's heart. By the end, you won't just remember Johnny's punchlines, you'll understand his rules and why breaking them meant exile. Ready? Let's start where the laughter turned into a gasp. The monkey meltdown. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson seemed untouchable. Politicians, rock stars, and even comedians known for chaos all walked onto his stage and ended up playing by his rules. Carson had the timing, the wit, and, most importantly, the composure. But his Tonight Show kingdom had one fatal flaw: live animals. And in 1970s television, nothing was more unpredictable. Enter Joan Embry, San Diego Zoo's most popular guest expert. She had charmed the Tonight Show audience dozens of times, with everything from snakes to parrots. So when she brought in a small capuchin monkey named Mo, Carson didn't blink. Mo had clung sweetly to Joan's sleeve during rehearsal, quiet as a doll. The producers assured Johnny it was safe. This would be a guaranteed laugh and a warm segment. What no one accounted for was Johnny's signature look. Under the blazing studio lights, his meticulously styled silver hair gleamed like polished metal. To a monkey, that shimmer must have looked like something worth grabbing. As the opening applause faded, the audience watched Carson lean casually toward Joan, prepared with a question. Then, without warning, Mo shrieked, leapt off Joan's arm, and latched directly onto Johnny's head. Not his shoulder, not his lap. Right on top of that iconic hair, gripping it like branches in a jungle. For a second, Johnny froze, eyes wide, audience howling. He raised his hands as if surrendering, but then came the real disaster. A warm stream trickled down from his scalp, soaking his collar and dripping onto his tie. Johnny's instinct was to turn it into comedy. "Well, folks, it's drizzling in here," he deadpanned. The crowd roared, but a closer look showed his fingers trembling as he reached for a towel. Even Carson, master of calm, couldn't fully disguise how rattled he was. During the commercial break, the illusion of control evaporated. Instead of gently toweling off, Johnny stormed backstage, still wearing his jacket, and yanked open the emergency shower usually reserved for fire drills. Crew members later recalled the surreal sight. America's most dignified host standing under a torrent of water in a full suit, scrubbing his hair furiously, muttering about professional television, not barnyard theater. When he finally returned, blow-dried and changed into a fresh shirt, he sat down at the desk as if nothing had happened. That was Carson's genius. Deliver the show, no matter what. But once the cameras were off, there was no joke. He summoned his producers and laid down a new law. No primates above shoulder height, period. The fallout didn't stop there. NBC quietly added a warning sign near the studio entrance. Caution, Johnny's hair is not a branch. Mo, the monkey, was retired from future appearances. And Johnny? He never forgot the humiliation of losing his composure live on air, soaked not in sweat, but in monkey urine. It was a reminder that even the king of late night could be brought down by the smallest creature in the room. But as bad as that night was, it wasn't the most dangerous, because the very next animal segment brought Johnny face to face with death itself. The cheetah close call. If Johnny Carson thought a monkey on his head was the low point of animal segments, he hadn't met the cheetah. Carson was a curious man by nature. He loved gadgets, magic tricks, and anything unusual. That curiosity usually served him well. It gave him questions that made interviews sparkle. But on this night, curiosity nearly got him killed. During a commercial break, animal trainer Ron Shannon was preparing a cheetah for the next segment. The big cat lounged inside a reinforced cage, pacing slowly under the hot studio lights. Shannon reassured everyone, perfectly calm. Famous last words. Johnny, unable to resist, wandered over for a closer look. He tilted his head, studying the animal with the casual confidence of a man who'd handled everything television could throw at him. But the cheetah's eyes told another story. They weren't calm. They were locked, unblinking, calculating. That wasn't curiosity. That was predator instinct. Then it happened. With a speed no one expected, the cheetah launched forward. Claws raked violently against the steel bars, the entire cage rattling like a freight train. The roar that tore out of its throat wasn't some cute soundbite for late-night laughs. It was primal, so loud it froze the audience mid-clap. Carson didn't just take a step back. He launched himself backwards so fast he tumbled over a chair, sprawling onto the studio floor. His tie skewed sideways, dignity scattered somewhere under the desk. For a split second, Studio 6B fell into absolute silence. The band stopped playing. The crew froze. The only sound was the cheetah's furious growl echoing through the studio. And then Carson did what he always did. He found the joke. Dusting himself off, his voice shaking just enough to betray the adrenaline, he deadpanned. Well, I think I just lost 9 lives. The audience erupted, relief spilling into laughter. But behind the smile, Johnny was shaken. Back at his desk, his hands trembled as he shuffled his cue cards. This wasn't stage fright. This was raw, physical shock, the kind that lingers long after the cameras stop rolling. NBC executives, of course, thought they had struck gold. They replayed Carson's backward fall for years on blooper specials. Every time it aired, Johnny hated it. He'd fire off memos, get fresh tape, retire that clip. But it never stopped. To him, it wasn't a blooper. It was a near-death moment wrapped in ratings gold. The aftermath was swift. Producers marked the studio floor with tape, creating a new rule known as the Carson line. No large predator was ever allowed within 3 feet of Johnny's desk again. Trainers had to follow it to the inch. When a rival talk show aired the clip years later, Carson's temper finally broke. He barked at NBC's legal team, "Next time, I'll feed their host to a cat." For a man known for calm, it was as close to genuine fury as anyone had seen. Johnny survived the cheetah. But as terrifying as that night was, animals weren't always the biggest problem. Sometimes the danger came dressed in black lace and stiletto heels, ready to turn live television into a battlefield of its own. Madonna's desk takeover. By the 1990s, Johnny Carson had faced it all. Politicians dodging questions, drunks stumbling through interviews, even wild animals turning his studio into a circus. But nothing prepared him for the night Madonna walked through the Tonight Show curtains in 1994. She didn't enter like a guest. She entered like she owned the place. Black bustier, lace gloves, a smirk that dared censors to keep up. Every step down that stage felt like a challenge. And instead of heading to the guest chair like every other star before her, Madonna sauntered to Johnny's desk and perched herself right on the edge of it. The audience went wild. Johnny, not so much. He leaned back, eyes darting, suddenly looking like a man cornered in his own kingdom. This wasn't an interview. It was an invasion. Her first line set the tone. "Johnny, I chose you for my first because they say you're gentle." Gasps, cheers, whistles. The crowd ate it up. Carson's ears flushed red beneath the makeup. His smile frozen in place as the censors in the control booth scrambled to keep up with what was rapidly turning into live television's most dangerous tightrope act. Madonna wasn't done. She snatched Johnny's cue cards, fanned herself with them, then asked him point blank if he wore boxers. Carson tried to redirect, but the pop star had all the momentum. When he reached for his coffee mug, she licked her finger, tapped the rim, and whispered, "Too hot." The studio howled. Johnny forced a chuckle, but his eyes were scanning desperately toward the booth, silently begging for a commercial break. And when it finally came, he sighed to his producer, "Book me a nun tomorrow." Off camera, Johnny was livid. He wasn't a prude. He'd sparred with innuendo for decades. But Madonna had broken his golden rule. Control belongs to the host. On live television, that loss of control is fatal. Ratings, however, told a different story. NBC executives called it a triumph. Viewership spiked through the roof. They begged Johnny to invite her back. His answer was pure Carson. Cool, measured, and final. Once is memorable. Twice is self-destruct. It was the rare moment when Johnny, who had survived wild animals and unpredictable guests, looked genuinely rattled. Not by danger, but by someone who outmaneuvered him in front of millions. And if Madonna's chaos embarrassed him, what happened next would humiliate him. Because the Tonight Show's most charming animal guest was about to turn the studio into something no amount of jokes could clean up. The elephant disaster. If a monkey on his head was humiliating and a cheetah at his throat was terrifying, Johnny Carson's next animal encounter was flat out disastrous. And it didn't just rattle him. It left the Tonight Show stage reeking for days. The guest that night seemed harmless enough, a baby elephant. Everyone agreed it would be a ratings slam dunk. Elephants are adorable, charismatic, and guaranteed to draw awes from the audience. But what the producers didn't consider was how unpredictable baby elephants can be when they're spooked. The moment the animal entered, the audience melted with delight. Johnny smiled, ready with his usual quick one-liners. Then the stage lights shifted, and the heat of the cameras made the elephant nervous. What happened next wasn't comedy, it was chaos. A low rumble echoed through the studio. The tail lifted, and then came a cascade so massive it sounded like a waterfall hitting concrete. The studio floor was instantly covered in a steaming brown flood, right in front of Carson's desk. The audience gasped, then broke into shocked laughter. Johnny gagged, covering his nose with a handkerchief. He tried to deflect with a quip, "Ed ordered takeout," but his voice cracked, betraying just how overwhelmed he was by the smell. Things only got worse. Stagehands rushed in with buckets and mops, but in the panic, one slipped, splashing the mess even farther across the floor. Within seconds, the gleaming Tonight Show set looked like a disaster zone. Steam literally rose into the studio lights, creating a haze so foul that cameramen refused to zoom wide. The audience only saw close-ups of Johnny's forced smile. But if you were in that studio, you saw the host of The Tonight Show practically surrounded by a moat of elephant dung. Still, Carson powered through, shifting his chair several feet upstage to escape the stench and soldiering on with the interview. But during the break, his composure cracked. Crew members later recalled Johnny pacing in his dressing room, muttering, "I like a good story, but not one steaming under my chair." The fallout was immediate. NBC installed new precautions. Plastic sheeting rolled out before any large animals, doubled hazard pay for janitors, and a 2-year ban on elephants. For Johnny, the message was clear. No more circus acts that could reduce his stage to a zoo. But as messy as that disaster was, the next near meltdown didn't come from an animal. It came from one of the sweetest guests Johnny had ever booked, a grandmother who collected potato chips. And what started as a wholesome segment nearly turned into tragedy on live television. The Cookie Lady's heart attack scare. Sometimes the most dangerous Tonight Show segments didn't involve teeth, claws, or chaos. Sometimes they started with something as harmless as a potato chip. Her name was Myrtle Young, a sweet grandmother from Indiana who had the kind of charm television producers dream about. She wasn't a celebrity, a politician, or a rock star. She was a factory worker who collected potato chips that looked like famous people, animals, and shapes. When Myrtle arrived at The Tonight Show with 2 tins full of her prized collection, Johnny saw it as the perfect slice of Americana. It was quirky, wholesome, and guaranteed to delight viewers. At first, it went exactly as planned. Myrtle proudly held up a chip shaped like Abraham Lincoln's profile. The audience applauded. Johnny smiled warmly, and everyone leaned in for more. She pulled out another chip that resembled a seahorse. The crowd laughed with genuine joy. For once, The Tonight Show wasn't about Hollywood egos or political debates. It was about a grandmother sharing her passion. But Johnny's mischievous streak was never far away. As Myrtle turned to face the audience, Johnny spotted an ordinary potato chip on the desk. You could almost see the devil on his shoulder. He picked it up, crunched down dramatically, and pretended to chew one of Myrtle's treasures. The audience erupted. Myrtle spun around, eyes wide, the hand flying to her chest. "Oh, mercy!" she gasped, believing Johnny had just eaten Abraham Lincoln. At first, it looked like part of the gag, until her knees buckled, her face drained of color, and she clutched her chest in panic. The laughter in the studio turned to stunned silence. Johnny's grin vanished. He dropped the chip instantly and rushed to steady her arm. This wasn't a comedy bit anymore. This was a medical emergency. During the commercial break, paramedics stormed the set. Johnny stayed by Myrtle's side, apologizing over and over, asking if she needed water, a doctor, anything at all. Myrtle, trying to be gracious, smiled weakly and whispered, "Look at this one, Johnny," still determined to show off her collection despite the scare. But Carson was shaken. Later that night, he personally called her hotel room 3 separate times to check on her, to apologize, and even to offer to replace her entire collection if she wanted. Backstage, he told head writer Raymond Siller that landed wrong. Never scare sweet grandmas again. For weeks afterward, Johnny replayed the footage in his dressing room, wincing every time Myrtle clutched her chest. NBC asked to use the clip in a blooper reel. Carson flatly refused. To him, it wasn't funny. It was cruel. Myrtle eventually recovered, but the moment left a permanent mark on Johnny. It showed him just how fragile live television could be, and how quickly an innocent joke could cross a line. But while Johnny could forgive himself for upsetting a grandmother, not every guest earned that same grace. Because when a cocky young comedian named Chevy Chase tried to steal Carson's stage, Johnny didn't just lose his cool, he ended Chase's Tonight Show career. The Chevy Chase disaster. Chevy Chase was already a household name by the late 1970s. He had exploded out of Saturday Night Live, starred in hit comedies, and carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed he was untouchable. But when he walked onto Johnny Carson's stage in 1978, he made a fatal mistake. He thought he was bigger than The Tonight Show. The moment Chevy entered, the energy shifted. Instead of sliding into the guest chair, he slapped Johnny's desk and shouted, "How you doing, America?" as if he were the host. The crowd laughed nervously, but Johnny's face tightened almost immediately. For him, this wasn't just another segment. It was his kingdom, and Chase had just stormed the throne. From the very first question, the interview went off the rails. Johnny tried to ask about Chevy's latest film, but instead of answering, Chase launched into a 3-minute monologue about his own genius, barely stopping for air. He mocked Johnny's tie. He mugged for the cameras. At one point, he demanded the audience give him a louder round of applause. It wasn't just rude, it was a full-blown hijacking. And then came the moment that sealed his fate. Johnny had one tell when he was angry: the pencil. A gentle tap when mildly annoyed, a rapid-fire drum roll when furious. On this night, the pencil taps thundered like machine gun fire. But Chevy was too wrapped up in himself to notice. He leaned across the desk and slapped Johnny on the shoulder. The studio went dead silent. The audience thought it might be a gag, but Carson's reaction proved it wasn't. His voice dropped into a tone so cold it froze the room. "Touch me again, and you'll be hosting alone." That was no punchline. It was a warning. Chevy laughed awkwardly, tried to play it off, but the damage was done. The rest of the segment limped to a finish, Johnny forcing a smile while his eyes blazed with fury. When the cameras cut, Carson broke his usual routine. There was no polite handshake, no thanks for being here. Instead, he turned to his talent coordinator and asked one simple question: did he rehearse? The answer was no, and Johnny's response was decisive: then book him on any show that doesn't tape here. That night, Chevy Chase became persona non grata on The Tonight Show. For decades, literally decades, his name never appeared on the guest list again. Reporters would later ask Carson why Chase was never invited back. Johnny's reply was short and sharp: "I like guests who share the ball, not steal it." The lesson was crystal clear. Suggest you could replace Johnny Carson, and you'd be replaced instead. But while Johnny had no patience for arrogant comedians, the real heartbreak came when betrayal didn't come from a guest. It came from family. His protege, the one he trusted most, blindsided him with a move that cut deeper than any insult on live TV. The Joan Rivers betrayal. Johnny Carson could forgive a lot: arrogant comedians, chaotic animals, even embarrassing disasters. But betrayal? That was something he never forgot. And no betrayal cut deeper than the one delivered by Joan Rivers. Joan wasn't just another guest. She was family. Johnny had discovered her, coached her, and even handed her the most coveted role in late-night television: his permanent guest host. Every Monday night, when Carson took the evening off, Joan sat in his chair. And when she killed it, and she often did, Johnny beamed with pride. He once told friends, "She's the daughter I never had." Behind the scenes, he shared with her secrets he never gave anyone else: timing notes, comedic instincts, even strategies for handling hostile audiences. To Johnny, Joan was his protege, the natural heir to his empire, which is why what happened in October of 1986 shattered him. Fox executives had been quietly planning their own late-night show to compete directly with The Tonight Show. They offered Joan everything NBC never would: total creative control and her own name on the marquee. It was the chance of a lifetime, and Joan, along with her husband Edgar, signed the contract in secret. The problem? She hadn't told Johnny. Not a word. Carson found out the worst way possible, through the trades. During rehearsal, Ed McMahon handed him the latest issue of Variety. The headline screamed, "Rivers defects to Fox." Johnny went pale, his hands gripping the paper until it crumpled. Crew members said he walked off set, locked himself in his dressing room, and lit a cigarette, something he almost never did before taping. When he returned, he delivered the show on autopilot, skipping every joke about Joan that had been written into his cue cards. Rivers later claimed she called him to explain, but Carson always insisted the calls never came. If she wanted to reach me, he told friends, she had my home number, my office number, even the private line on the stage wall. None of them rang. The fallout was brutal. Johnny gave a simple order to NBC executives: erase her. Every anniversary montage, every rerun, every highlight reel, Joan's name and face were gone. Her file was stamped off limits. Fox launched The Late Show starring Joan Rivers, and for one brief night, she actually outrated Carson. But the glow faded fast. Ratings plummeted, and behind the scenes, her husband Edgar spiraled into depression. In 1987, just months after the show's cancellation, Edgar took his own life. Joan was left devastated and still estranged from the man she once called her mentor. She tried to reconcile for years. Letters, gifts, even Christmas baskets were all returned unopened. Johnny never spoke to her again. When he died in 2005, their feud was still unresolved. And when Joan finally returned to The Tonight Show in 2014, nearly 3 decades later, under Jimmy Fallon, she quietly touched the armrest of Johnny's old chair and whispered, "Miss you, Johnny." It was the echo of a friendship that had burned brighter and ended colder than any in late-night history. But while betrayals scarred Carson, nothing shook him more than direct confrontations, moments when anger boiled over live, and even Johnny himself snapped. Explosive confrontations. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the picture of calm. But there were rare nights when his mask slipped, when simmering tension with guests or even close friends exploded into full-blown confrontations. These weren't playful sparring matches. These were moments when Johnny's icy composure cracked wide open. Charles Grodin, pushing too far. Charles Grodin was known for his deadpan style and a kind of awkward anti-comedy that made interviews feel like a duel. At first, Johnny played along, but in 1982, Grodin pushed past playful into cruel. He mocked Carson's voice, imitated him in a robotic monotone, and accused Johnny of not caring about his answers. "You don't really care what I have to say, do you?" Honestly. The crowd laughed, assuming it was all part of the bit, until Johnny's smile vanished. His voice dropped into a low growl. "What do you care about, Charles? Do you care about anything at all?" The tension was palpable. What was supposed to be comedy had turned into open hostility. The handshake at the end was forced, the laughter hollow. Grodin's appearances became fewer, more carefully staged. Johnny had drawn a line: mock him all you want, but don't question his integrity. Ed McMahon, the shark debate. Even Carson's closest ally wasn't immune. For 3 decades, Ed McMahon was Johnny's loyal sidekick, his laughter a safety net. But in 1983, during what should have been a throwaway monologue joke about sharks, Ed suddenly pushed back. Johnny cracked a line about shark attacks. Ed interrupted, correcting him with unexpected authority. "The shark never stops swimming, Johnny, all its life." The audience chuckled, but Carson stiffened. He tried to move on, but Ed pressed further. Then came the sting. "My job for 30 years has been to make you look good, Johnny." Sometimes that means speaking up when you're about to make yourself look foolish. For Carson, those words cut deep. He wasn't just being corrected, he was being undermined by the one man who was supposed to have his back. His pencil tapped furiously on the desk, a storm brewing behind his eyes. He finally snapped, "We'll be right back after these messages." The commercial break was filled with whispered fury, crew members describing it as the tensest moment they had ever witnessed between the two men. They returned professional, but something had shifted. Their easy chemistry was never quite the same. Wayne Newton, backstage threats. But the most explosive confrontation never even made it to air. It happened backstage, and it changed The Tonight Show forever. For years, Carson had joked about Wayne Newton's carefully groomed Las Vegas persona. Most guests laughed off Johnny's barbs. Newton didn't. Already under immense pressure, facing threats from organized crime figures and worried for his family's safety, Newton snapped. In 1980, he marched into NBC's Burbank studios unannounced, bypassed security, and stormed straight into Carson's office. His voice thundered, "These jokes about me will stop, and they'll stop now, or I'll kick your rear end." Some say Newton shoved Carson. Others claim he just loomed inches from his face. Either way, the threat was unmistakable. For Johnny, who believed in sharp words but not physical intimidation, it crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Newton was banned from The Tonight Show permanently. His name was erased from booking lists, and Johnny never mentioned him again. Behind the ban was a message that echoed through Hollywood. Jokes were fair game, but threats were not. These confrontations showed a different Carson, a man who could absorb chaos but not disrespect. He'd spar with comedians, roll with disasters, and crack jokes through the worst of it. But the moment someone undermined his authority, whether it was a guest, a friend, or a fellow entertainer, Johnny snapped back hard. And for those who crossed the line, there was no forgiveness. Which is why, in the end, some guests didn't just get scolded. They were erased from The Tonight Show forever. The banned guests list. Johnny Carson may have been the most polished host in television history, but he had a simple rule. If you broke the rhythm of The Tonight Show or crossed him personally, you were done. No second chances. Over the years, this rule created one of the most infamous blacklists in entertainment, a group of stars who were permanently banned from Carson's couch. Uri Geller, the fraud exposed. In the early 1970s, psychic Uri Geller was captivating audiences by bending spoons and reading minds. But Carson, who had performed magic as a boy, despised phony mystics. He secretly enlisted skeptic James Randi to rig a test with spoons, envelopes, and film canisters supplied by The Tonight Show itself. On air, Geller failed spectacularly. He mumbled about bad energy and hostile vibes as nothing worked. Carson grinned politely, but the decision was final. We exposed him as a fraud, no more invitations. To this day, the clip remains one of the most famous televised debunkings of the paranormal. Bob Hope, the walking infomercial. Bob Hope was one of America's comedy legends, but by the late 1970s, his Tonight Show appearances had become commercials in disguise. He arrived with pre-written jokes, sponsor mentions, and even camera angle demands. Carson hated it. To him, The Tonight Show was about spontaneity, not product placement. After one appearance overloaded with sponsor plugs, Johnny snapped backstage. He's not doing television. He's reciting a brochure. Bob Hope was quietly dropped. There was no formal announcement, just a vanishing act. Charlton Heston, the monologue machine. Charlton Heston's booming voice made him a Hollywood icon, but as a guest, he was unbearable. Johnny would ask a quick question, and Heston would respond with a lecture. Greek philosophy, Shakespearean tangents, even speeches about freedom and democracy. What should have been a 2-minute answer ballooned into 15-minute monologues. After one especially long-winded appearance, Carson declared, "He's running his own program inside mine, and it's not entertaining." Heston never sat on the Tonight Show couch again. Don Rickles, the Destroyer. Don Rickles was one of Carson's favorite roasters, but his chaos eventually went too far. When Rickles guest hosted one night, he broke Carson's treasured walnut cigarette box, an irreplaceable gift from a stagehand who had once saved Johnny during a studio fire. Johnny turned the incident into comedy, barging onto Rickles' set the next night and barking, "You broke my box!" But off camera, his patience ran out. Rickles ignored timing cues, pushed offensive jokes past the censors, and left the set in shambles. After mocking an overweight audience member in 1985, Carson pulled the plug. Rickles was never formally banned, but the invitation stopped cold. Fred Rogers, too gentle for midnight. Fred Rogers was beloved by millions of children, but on late-night TV, his gentle pace was a disaster. His slow, thoughtful answers created long silences, and minute-by-minute ratings plummeted during his segment. Carson respected Rogers deeply, even calling him a saint, but privately admitted saints don't succeed in late night. Rogers was never invited back, not out of anger, but survival. Each of these bans revealed Johnny's instincts as a host. He wasn't just protecting his own ego, he was protecting the flow of The Tonight Show. If a guest disrupted that flow, whether by fraud, self-promotion, arrogance, destruction, or simply moving too slowly, Johnny drew the line. For Carson, live television was like jazz. Timing, rhythm, and chemistry mattered more than anything else. Break that rhythm, and you were gone. And that's why, after 30 years, Carson's reputation remained untouchable. He wasn't just funny. He was the guardian of late night itself. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television like no one before or since. His composure, his wit, his ability to turn disaster into laughter made him the gold standard every host is still measured against today. But as we've seen, even the king of cool had his breaking points. A monkey turned his famous hair into a bathroom. A cheetah nearly sent him sprawling into an early retirement. Madonna transformed his desk into a stage for rebellion. A baby elephant left his studio in ruins. A grandmother's heart nearly stopped over a potato chip. Chevy Chase's arrogance earned him a lifetime ban. Joan Rivers' betrayal cut him deeper than any on-air humiliation. Friends like Charles Grodin and even Ed McMahon pushed him past patience. And stars from Uri Geller to Don Rickles found themselves on Johnny's permanent blacklist. Each moment chipped away at the myth of unshakable control. But together, they revealed something more important. Carson's true genius wasn't that he never cracked. It was that he knew where the line was. He could laugh through chaos, but when dignity or honesty was on the line, he drew it sharp and never crossed it. That discipline kept The Tonight Show from becoming just another circus. It made it a temple of comedy, watched by millions every night. Johnny Carson's reign ended in 1992, but his lessons still echo through late night. Charm your audience, respect the stage, and know when to say, never again. Because the legacy of Johnny Carson isn't just about the laughs he delivered, it's about the battles he fought to protect the art of live television. So if you believe his brilliance, his meltdowns, and his unforgettable battles deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. Together, we'll keep telling the stories behind the glamour, exposing the chaos behind the calm, and keeping alive the memory of the greatest host television ever knew.